covering all the news from every dark corner of the universe. SliceofSciFi.com.
And once again, it is time for another Slice of Sci-Fi. I'm Michael Armenenge.
And I'm Megan Zier.
I'm Keith Lane. And I'm Ben Raggington. And we have the great honor and pleasure of having, as our guest tonight, Simon Barry. He is the creator, the executive producer of the new sci-fi or sci-fi hit, Continuum. So, Simon, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks, guys. I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Hey, one of the things that we need to do right off the bat, because there may be people living under rocks and caves and so forth that do not know what Continuum is, give us a rundown. What is this whole show, Continuum on Sci-Fi, all about?
Well, Continuum is a show about a group of time travelers, mostly terrorists from the year 2077, who tried to come back in time and rewrite history to suit their political ends, and they inadvertently get a extra body that travels back with them in the form of Kira Cameron, who's a police officer from the year 2077, who realizes that not only does she want to get home to her husband and her son, but she needs to protect history from getting changed so that she can go back to the same future that she left.
Fantastic. From what we're seeing here is that this show was an enormous hit in both Canada and in the United States, so much so that it has been picked up for a second season, which I think is a call for congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I'm kind of curious, since the show has been such a hit in both Canada and the U.S., what have you heard in terms of fan reaction, and has the response been different between Canadian audiences and U.S. audiences?
Well, we have the blessing of having a very active sci-fi community that supports this show, and they're very vocal and they are incredibly engaged. So, one of the pleasures of my job is to hopefully be the person who gets to engage with the fans and respond to their questions and kind of track the questions and the feedback that the show is receiving. And I have to say, we've had a very it's been a full-time job just sort of dealing with that. We premiered, I think, at a time where there was a bit of a drought of good sci-fi on television. And so we've had an enormously positive response from what I think is kind of the diehard sci-fi community, who were, I think, really glad that sci-fi shows were coming back in vogue, and obviously now, since last year, several more shows have made their announcements that they're coming or have even come on the air. So it was nice that we were kind of just ahead of that curve slightly, and that we got that response of genuine kind of appreciation. That for a long time, I think SciFi Fans had been left out of the programming business, and they had been rewarded for their patience, hopefully, with some high-quality shows, including Continuum and some other shows that are coming on this year.
So now,
it's been great. And the difference really has been, I mean, it's funny, it's an interesting question, because the difference between the U.S. and Canadian fans hasn't really been that dramatically different. I think that, because the show premiered in Canada first, and there was probably a large community of American sci-fi fans who managed to find the show one way or another before it aired on Sci-Fi Network. We had kind of this initial engagement with both groups of fans online early. And then, of course, there was a secondary tier of U.S. fans who caught the show on Sci-Fi Network. So there was this slight delay between the Canadian release and the U.S. release, but it was pretty uniform in terms of the response and the feedback.
So now, since this was actually produced in Canada originally, and Canada has a little different, they have a little different leniency on what you can actually show and get away with on their channels versus our channels. Was there much of a challenge on adapting it to the U.S., or are you actually producing for U.S.?
We don't produce for the network at all in the U.S. We actually treat the show as a fully Canadian show, and the reason is because SyFy is an acquisition. The SyFy network is an acquisition, so we actually don't develop the show with SyFy. SyFy just is one of many, many countries and many broadcasters around the world that has licensed the show. So even though from your guys' perspective, SyFy is the broadcaster of record in the States, it's, from our perspective, one of many partners that we have all over the world that are licensed partners and broadcasting the show. So we really we kind of don't work with them as a network. We work with the Canadian network, Showcase, which is our primary creative relationship, and Showcase sets the bar in terms of what we can and can't get away with, and Showcase is our first order of response in terms of what the show is and what kind of content we're putting on.
So the time difference even is something that is different between Canada and here. We actually have more commercial breaks, so finding that spot, that extra couple minutes or so forth in the show that you have to use to cut out, or is that something that SyFy does in order to bring it on? You don't actually have to figure out what that is. They do that for you.
Yeah, pretty much. We're at the mercy of any broadcaster we license the show to. And so SyFy, because they have a different set of breaks, will, on their own volition, kind of recut the show for those breaks. We cut one version of the show here for the Canadian audience, and that's kind of our where we kind of finish creatively. And then once the show gets shipped to all the various countries, the broadcasters can then take apart the show. Unfortunately, I wish they didn't, but we don't really control that, and that's because there are so many different versions of the show in different territories that are, basically adapted for that broadcaster's requirements. So I wish it was something we had the time to really massage into being more appropriate for the SyFy cuts, and I hope maybe down the road that we get the chance to do that. We have a very, very challenging delivery schedule for our Canadian broadcaster, so it doesn't give us a lot of time to create alternate versions of the show for other networks. And that's, I personally would love to do that. I don't like a lot of the cuts that SyFy has made or the choices they've made, but I understand that that's their pattern, and that we're kind of at their mercy in that sense.
That's so weird you say that, because I was just about to ask you if you saw any cuts either in America or just outside of Canada that just really irked you, like, oh, why did they do that? Why did they cut it that way?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's always irking when it's not not the show you deliver. I mean, I take great pride in being the last set of eyes on every cut before it goes out, and that's part of my job as showrunner, is to make sure that I deliver a really polished product. When it's taken and tampered with, it's a slight on what I try to do and what I spend many, many hours a day working on finessing. So, yes, it irks me every time. There is no one time that's worse than others. They're always bad, in my view, because creatively they're not my choice. However, I get it, and that's kind of the cost of doing business with many different vendors. And I accept that as part of the reality that we live in, which is a worldwide community of people who want to see the show. So it's I'm fine with the trade-off, because I would rather the show got out to as many fans as it does, and I'm prepared to give up a little bit of control creatively in order for that to happen.
Yeah. See, what's great about that, though, is that makes everybody have to watch it 2 or 3 times. Okay, we watched the U.S. version. What did they cut out? We got to watch the Canadian version now.
I was going to say, everyone should watch the Blu-ray version if they really love the show, because the Blu-ray version is probably the purest version of the show, and that is probably the closest version to the one that that we're delivering here in Vancouver.
I was going to say, fandom being what it is, they're always, the diehards of any kind of television show are always anxious to try to get as many different alternate versions of any particular series, the various episodes that make them up. I mean, they're
we should know well.
That 3 seconds,
I mean,
that 3 seconds made all the difference.
Hey, I plead guilty to that. I really do.
I think you're talking to a guy who may have 4 versions of Lord of the Rings trilogy in different formats.
I think, yes, so do
so
I.
much money on revised versions of Blu-rays and DVDs. It's just not. I don't even want to embarrass myself by admitting it.
How many versions of Blade Runner do you have? There you go.
I've got them all.
Exactly.
How many of Star Wars do we have?
If I include the Laserdisc.
Oh, man.
Okay, you win.
Hat tip to you, sir.
Yeah, I bow to you. Okay,
So including the Laserdisc, I think I have 5.
Okay, you win.
See, now that's awesome, because that's actually one of the questions that I have, and you just answered it for me, and that is, are you a fan of sci-fi, and does that help you make this show as awesome as it is, because you are a sci-fi fan and know what we want as sci-fi fans?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I know I am a sci-fi fan. I've been a sci-fi fan since day one. But, you always think that there's a great balance in my job of trying to please myself as a sci-fi fan, but also trying to please the audience of sci-fi fans. And that's fun in the sense that I know what I like, but I also know that I can't sometimes push the envelope as far necessarily as I want to do it, and that I have to acknowledge that the fan base is big and that we need to let everybody in, So as much as I'm tempted sometimes to kind of go hardcore, it's not good for the show in the sense that we came out of the gate as one kind of thing, and it'd be disingenuous of me to sort of change that up midway, So in this show, in Continuum, certainly we were conscious of the fact that we didn't want to alienate a big chunk of the audience. We did want a show that would cross over, and because in Canada we're on a network that isn't identifiably branded pure sci-fi, we did have a mandate that was like we want to make the net big. We want to make this a show that fans of sci-fi are going to love, but also fans of just quality TV are going to love, and that they won't be alienated. And so out of the gate, that was really very present in my mind. And as much as I could have pushed the envelope of the hardcore sci-fi elements in one direction, that really wasn't what I sold to the broadcaster, and it would have been, a little bit rude of me to have pushed that agenda.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because it brings a question to mind. When you came up with the idea for Continuum, I mean, how did that happen? How did you come up with this idea of this time travel story? How long did it take for you to put it together, to develop it, and then finally, how long did it take you to finally get that into production?
Yeah, it was. It started essentially two years ago, 2 summers ago, almost. I was looking to come up with an idea for a show to pitch, which I did every year for many, many years. And I was doing that on a regular basis. I would develop an idea, I would take the idea out and pitch it, and usually I would sell the idea to a company or a network, and then I would get paid to write the script, which was great. But I was not having very much luck getting into production. And I think one of the reasons was that I was sort of approaching the process a little bit selfishly, trying to make a show that only I wanted to watch. And then I was very conscious of the fact that I was doing very well selling shows, but not doing very well making them. And I thought, what I needed to do was take maybe the genre-bending approach to television instead of a real kind of narrow view. And so I knew that as much as I had avoided sort of the template shows like procedural cop or lawyer or medical, that those types of shows were not something I had really tried to pitch. There were elements of those shows that were sort of lent themselves to the sales process and to the structure of television. And I just wanted to kind of find a structure that I could blend with my love of sci-fi. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, the idea of time travel had always been on my mind because from a production point of view, time travel presents you with a great opportunity to have a big mythology but not spend a lot of money on the world, because the great thing about time travel into the present, whether it's from the past or the future, is that your mythology is a notion, and it's big and it's discussed, but it doesn't have to be represented all the time, And so that was where I was leaning, and then it was really a decision about whether my time travel notion would merge with which kind of TV model that was the most comfortable, for the buyer. And I settled on the police version of it because the terrorism aspect of the future and the political dissonance felt like it could fit better into a crime model than a legal model or a medical model. And so the idea that this could be, I could kind of sneak the sci-fi show into the police show, and that made it easier for me to make it palatable to the buyer. So it really was me being as Machiavellian as possible. I was really presented to the buyers really a show that was, for them, a police show, but for me was a backdoor to some really good sci-fi mythology. And the broadcasters aren't stupid. They could see what I was trying to do, but I think it made them feel a little bit safer that this was going to be built around the model of a police show, and that felt familiar, And
exactly, it's comfortable.
Something easy.
And so that's it was really that pragmatic. I'm kind of, once I'd established that the time travel would fit with the police model, I'd seen versions of this done, obviously, with Life on Mars and shows that and movies like Time Cop and things like that. But I was really trying to find an angle on the difference between the future and the present based on politics. And I like the idea that our version, my version at least, of the dystopian future could be a prism to see the present day through.
That's heady.
And not only that, but isn't your dystopian future, it's dystopian, but aren't the people there kind of like, they're okay? I mean, they're not like being trampled on by
this. It's dystopic utopia.
Exactly.
Every culture thinks their culture is awesome.
Wait a minute.
Do. I mean, the funny thing is if you came to 2013 from 1900, it would look pretty dystopic here. I got to tell you, because everything we say and do is monitored. There's no privacy. We are locked into these our technological lives in a way that, from that perspective of just agrarian culture and pure freedom, we would seem like really slaves to a system that controlled us and not the other way around. And so I think that perspective is, whether you agree or not, perspective is true, because you can't argue with someone's perspective against another perspective. It's just part of the character's viewpoint.
What I find fascinating about this, though, is that you actually have to sneak a sci-fi show in these days. Considering the blockbuster, phenomenal amount of genre stuff that's just making gazillions of dollars out there in the movie theaters, that they're still a little skittish on bringing sci-fi to mainstream,
and that you'd have to use this model, as you said, of the police procedural in order to be able to sell it. It is kind of surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I was based in LA when I was developing Continuum, and really there was only a couple of networks that were open to straight up sci-fi at that time, and SyFy being one of them, obviously, and that is limiting in a way too. I mean, I really think that there are probably way more sci-fi ideas and way fewer buyers than you realize. And that's tricky. When you look at all the other networks and what the diversity of what they would buy, you are conscious that sci-fi is a challenge to sell, because when you make a list of all the networks that are likely to buy straight up sci-fi, it's not a very long list.
But then
in fact, I would never have targeted. From my perspective, I would never have targeted Showcase in Canada off the bat as being embracing of sci-fi. I understand now that they do have a brand that incorporates a lot of different genres, and I love that about them. But at the time, it really did feel like a very narrow list. And that's intimidating when you make your living selling ideas. You really want to keep your options open, you know? And so it probably scared me off sci-fi for a long time, even though it was my first love dramatically.
So I want to comment from the other side, though. Once you decided to do a police procedural, was there like sort of new ideas that came up now? It's like, oh, now that I'm doing this, how can I, you know, turn it on its head? Or how can I break the rules of this police procedural now that I'm doing it?
Yeah, I was always looking to embrace what made the procedural model help me make the sci-fi show. And the truth is that the procedural model does give you a really strong foundation of storytelling in terms of the building of the show and the fact that you have to keep the show going week in and week out and week in and week out. And some of those advantages it was nice that they kind of fit in with the mythology of Continuum from day one. For example, when Kira arrives, she can't do it alone, so she needs to kind of build an alliance with law enforcement because the reality is that is the only way to beat these guys at their own game. So that kind of fit into that also. But the other thing is that whatever Liberate was doing would be perceived by the present day folks as criminal activity. And so whether I had Kira engaged with the police or not, there would be no way that these guys could operate in the present without drawing the attention of the police.
Right.
And so in embracing also the politics of terrorism and sort of what Liberate's goals are, I could make sure that no matter what happened, the police would always kind of be this hub of information and action that connected to these guys and their activities. And that for me was really just a nice natural connection that would have happened even if I hadn't come up with the police part of it. I would have had to address it anyway.
Right, great.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful.
Because audiences would have expected it, you know. Even if I told the whole story from the terrorist's point of view, let's say, the audience would have gone, hey, why isn't no one looking into this? Why is no one taking a stand or at least investigating this from a cohesive point of view? And so just having Kira already in the story made that a natural connection. And so it just fit perfectly. And I'm really, you know, I was grateful at that point because it didn't feel like it was a cop show with a sci-fi twist. It felt like a sci-fi show with a cop show element.
Right.
I can't tell you how happy I am to hear that. It's really refreshing to hear you say that because unfortunately there are some showrunners that have this idea of it just being this one very simple, limited concept, and they're only thinking story, you know, week to week to week. They're not thinking something on a bigger scale, which now brings this other question to mind is, when you were coming up with the idea of this and when you were pitching it to Showcase, did you have an idea as to possibly how long the series would run? And did you already kind of have mapped out in your head a beginning, middle, and end to this entire continuum?
Well, I think it's crazy to go in to pitch a show if you already don't believe that it has longevity, because that's ultimately, you know, you spend the first part of the pitching the idea and the setup and the characters, and the second part of the pitch usually becomes a conversation about how the show can survive multiple seasons and where it goes, you know, and the arcs. And so I think that every writer, if they get the opportunity to pitch, has to have gone through that process for themselves before they go in, because you have to be able to answer that question and you have to have an answer for it. And so yes, it was always part of the process of building Continuum when it was a pitch, that the idea that it could be, that it had a natural endpoint in a sense that does she or doesn't she get home, number one. Also, what are the time paradox rules, and how do we, when do we find out if time is a flexible entity or if it is locked, and if there is all of these things were built into the mystery of the first episode. And so going into the pitch, it was really clear. It was like, these are the mysteries that need to be drawn out and explored, and also understand that structure allowed for all of these stories to be told in the interim. So yeah, the end game for me was always in my mind. It was part of the original pitch in a way, for sure. And then the middle the midpoints of major story changes and major story direction changes were somewhat part of the pitch, but were less important in that moment and became much more important as we moved into developing season to season.
That's fantastic stuff. I'll tell you, that's awesome.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to say goodbye because our time is almost up with you. But this has been just a very informative. It's nice to kind of get a glimpse behind the entire process when it comes to making these kinds of shows. So the question I have now is there any social media that you're on, or is there any way for fans to learn more about you or the show?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of pretty much, I think we have the heaviest Twitter presence maybe of any television show. Every one of our leads is on Twitter. Rachel Nichols, Victor Webster, Eric Knudsen, Stephen Lobo, Lexa Doig, Luvia Peterson, Brian Markinson, Jennifer Spence, even Tony Amendola. They're all on Twitter, and we engage with our Twitter followers almost weekly. In fact, we do when the show was running in Canada and in the States, we did a weekly Twitter event, usually two. And so we've always been engaged on Twitter from very early on. There's a website, continuumseries.com, which is also connected to Showcase.ca, and also SciFi.com will give you links to various connections to the show. But the show, for Canadian fans, I think continuumseries.com is probably the main hub. And I think actually for the U.S. fans too, they can engage with the show on that side as well. We have a Facebook presence, and we're very responsive. You'll find personally, I'm on Twitter every day, and Rachel's on Twitter even more than I am. So
awesome.
There's an ongoing dialogue with a lot of our fans on a constant basis.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we're going to let you go, but we'll definitely be watching Continuum.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. See you soon.